Waking up is an ongoing process. It may seem to some that it's like a coin, two sides, the sleeping sheep and the awakened, informed human. This is not the case. I will argue that those who adopt this mindset are in fact just trading one prison for another. Waking up is, or should be, like a continuous ascension into an ever-expanding wave of learning and growth. Or one could look at it as the never-ending rabbit hole, awareness growing the further down one goes. What good does it do to just accept or have realization of a conspiracy or suppressed knowledge and then stop, claiming to know the truth? Now, I'm not saying to believe everything you see on YouTube or jump on the bandwagon of every new conspiracy theory that rears its head. Instead, let's embrace each of these things as a tool to use for ourselves, a springboard perhaps that can help us dislodge our paradigms, become more open-minded, gain alternate perspectives, and ultimately allow for the expanded potential of a creative worldview that breeds novel ideas, philosophies, and ways of living. I tend to think that we, as a species, have plateaued in our physical form, yet the mind, or better yet, our consciousness, is unbounded by such limitations. We are just now being subtly born, only now beginning to have this realization of ourselves as more than material-based creatures. I imagine we've had this revelation before in aeons past, and somehow it was either stolen from us or we knowingly buried it deep within out of fear. There is no excuse, as our numbers increase, to not take back what is our birthright: freedom, happiness, and the peaceful contemplation of the great mystery. We are born. We grow as children, aligning with the patterns and frequencies of systems created before our birth. They become ingrained within us and manifest themselves as second nature. From the seemingly most mundane systems, such as the intervals of stoplights at an intersection, or the single-file linear processing of items at the checkout lane in a grocery store, all the way up the fractal ladder to the complex give and take of buying and selling in the world's economic market, or the intricate web of scheduled airline flights. Without prejudice, we have adopted all these things, and in turn are granted the notion of pseudo-freedom, the ability to freely make choices within a set parameter, within the boundaries of accepted rules. The game is set up in a way that one is forced to follow. One has no choice in this. Even within the mind, we have been conditioned and confined through psychological warfare tactics, such as advertisements and commercials, the subtle cues of cultural and corporate symbolism, the language used in news stories, coupled with emotionally charged photographs. We begin our mornings with an inauspicious demeanor, only to end up brimming over by evening with useless, factoidal information and spoon-fed opinions by authorities and experts. The individual is lost in a manufactured electro-pornographic fog, where once the ego stood as a means of self-preservation and the embodiment of identity, now is a shallow vehicle driven by material gain and consumerism. The essence of our humanity has been intentionally split down the middle, and this now is the dualistic machine in our present day that confronts us, pits us against each other and ourselves. There are those who declare themselves awake. This term, as a finality in one's existence or growth, must be abandoned and rebranded into verb form instead of a means to describe one's state. Awakening. We are in the process of awakening. The eyes of individuals may be opening, and each day that greets us allows for them to open a little more. Each new discovery or revelation is a finite point, a capstone on the succession of pyramids of one's awakening. Like the all-seeing eye, an illuminated window shining into the soul. Beneath is the structure of hard evidence, spiritual desires, and personal interpretations, creating the singularity of a truth. That truth then becomes one of many, and as well, a foundation block to the greater mystery. Together they unite the split, dualistic, manufactured identity of the modern human condition. In other words, we are made whole again. We may be labeled with derogatory terms such as conspiracy theorists, wackos, and a multitude of other words used to push us to the fringes of our social groups. We've become ostracized in such a way so that we can be packaged into a tidy subculture, easily used for media amusements or establishment agendas. They will ridicule us and provoke us into becoming reactionary. They will polarize us through blatant displays of corruption, greed, and injustice. Our job is to be vigilant and take note of the propaganda that is pushed on us. Realize the farce of politics as a system of slave management, and recognize our economic and monetary system for the invisible debt prison that it has become. How easily we have embraced these systems, and now regard them as necessary and integral to our existence. Waking up is the process of acknowledgement and shedding of these systems. I like to think that there are three main nodes a person encounters within this process, and those are denial, acceptance, and action. Denial is, of course, the healthy starting point to the big picture. It means the brain is struggling with the fact that there are unanswered questions in the worldview of the individual, but a good deal of effort must be made to move past this stage. There are protective measures that evolve during one's programming that then act as a security enforcement of the comfort so many of us remember prior to witnessing so many truths. And yes, many times, many of us can be envious of that comfort, that warm place in which we were so assured of everything in our lives. One must be skeptical of all that surrounds, but mostly the smug righteousness of the materialistic modern ego. Denial, in the context of this process, can then easily manifest out of fear of the breakdown of that ego, the fear of ridicule, the fear of the unknown, and what lies ahead for the individual. It can be daunting to look in the mirror and have a true acceptance that everything you knew and how you came to know it is utterly false and does not exist in the way you thought. Think about your upbringing, your education, relationships, employment, and go deep into the concepts and core of those things. At the base level, the lies and deceit become evident, though I think most of it is not intended or specifically directed at you. These are perceptions and ideals that have been inherited through generations. You can also see that, in addition to lies, campaigns of avoidance are being propagated through our society. How are we to accept this? Is seeing the conflict of interests within the institutions we've come to trust. All that we have known is based upon surface-level ideologies driven by the agendas of people with power and money. Once we begin to recognize this pattern in everything else, and as a result, verify for ourselves the misleading and distracting nature of our reality, we can finally move past the denial and into acceptance. After one experiences the stage of denial in their awakening process, comes the stage of acceptance. The stage of accepting the shift in one's paradigm is relatively brief. This is a moment of stasis and reflection, a time for saying our farewell speech to the inauthentic and false doctrines of archaic institutions. Wave goodbye to being compliant with explanations handed down by the old gatekeepers of information. Look to the road of action ahead and to opening the doors of truth that lie in wait. It's not uncommon to experience anger, depression, and even guilt in the recounting of one's life up until this moment. But as with everything in life, this is only temporary. You will begin to experience regular synchronicities, moments when the universe and its energies perfectly align with your thoughts, interests, and priorities, and are seemingly mirrored in your everyday environment. These are affirmations and omens that the path you now walk is supported, or rather encouraged, by Spirit. This path is the course of awakening. The negative emotions you may have felt must be channeled and focused into productive activities that lift you higher, and thus enabling the path of least resistance. When speaking of resistance here, it is not to say you will not encounter opposition or conflict. Instead, it is meant that your heart and intent will sail smoothly onward. Take notice of your newfound inner peace. Notice how your mind and body no longer seem to swim against the current of the universal flow. You have attained acceptance of the world's theater, of the facade that clouds our daily vision from seeing or appreciating our true nature. After the struggles of denial and acceptance, one becomes empowered, usually to take action in the midst of their awakening. Once again, we must come to acknowledge that everything is based on frequency. Violence and acts of hate or directed negative emotions are of primitive, low frequencies and must be abstained from except in times of absolute need. We do not and cannot discard these aspects of our being, as they are inherent and serve purpose in moments when we need them to, but it is unhealthy to form the majority of one's existence around them. We may call upon these negative energies in a life or death confrontation when our ability for self-preservation is threatened. It is possible to steer away from consuming impulses that are detrimental to ourselves and raise our frequency to a level where the whole of the being no longer thrives on those low vibrations. This can be accomplished in a number of ways, including meditation. Meditation also helps to find direction when too many distractions are bombarding you and keeping you from finding and staying on your path. This is the principle behind the practice and is shown to be effective in religious faiths around the world. By adopting meditation as a regular part of your daily routine, you're also helping to ensure that the awakening process continues and prevents you from slipping back into the brainwashed state from whence you came. But this is often not enough in terms of action. The individual tends to feel an obligation to help others in their awakening. Activism can play a key role in this, but there are so many pitfalls associated with it. I've seen with numerous groups throughout history and previously, it has been proven that at some point they are often infiltrated and their ideals ultimately compromised by intelligence agencies and rival groups. This is then followed by disinformation to sway public opinion, and once more it becomes easy to control, monitor, and define the group's activities. The group or individuals within it can just as well become patsies for a Hegelian dialectic agenda, if you will. Aside from these obvious issues with activism, it's also very easy for the person in the awakening mode to become too focused on whatever issue they've decided to stand with, and thus stifling their further growth. It might as well be just another method for putting on blinders and going back to sleep. The best advice is to contribute by calling attention to issues and then keep moving and researching for truth. Of course, activists are definitely needed in our society to fight against certain injustices, but we are in a different category here. We are people striving for our own personal ascension, and then to seek out and do the same for others. We search for all the puzzle pieces and for alternative ways to put them together.